Hello everyone, my name is Guanzhou Hong. This presentation will be about my project report for ECE645. The topic I focus on is student-teacher learning for neural networks. Student-teacher learning is a very important and trending topic in deep learning, a sub-branch of machine learning. The technique itself has seen a lot of empirical success over the years, but there's very limited theoretical understanding of why it works, what makes it work, and when it doesn't work. Okay, so I will be doing some very preliminary analysis based on results from statistics to try to understand why this technique works. The research paper which I will be basing a lot of my ideas from is Learning Using Privileged Information, Similarity Control, and Knowledge Transfer. The paper itself is centered around kernel-based models, not neural nets, but there are a lot of ideas in it that are very generalizable. In particular, the way that they discuss knowledge representation is very interesting. Basically, if one wants to understand how to transfer knowledge between models, one better have some idea of how to represent knowledge to make the design analysis more modular, more systematic. So basically, the three elements of knowledge representation are the fundamental elements of knowledge, frames of knowledge, and structural connections of the frames of knowledge. Let me elaborate on these things in the context of a neural net. So here is a very simple architecture of a neural network. It's essentially a two-layer linear neural net. First, you see the input that is four-dimensional according to my drawing. And then the input meets the hidden layer of the neural net. What is the hidden layer? Well, it's represented by big W in purple. Okay, so it contains the hidden neurons. What are the hidden neurons? The hidden neurons are the row vectors of this matrix W. Oh, and then after obtaining these so-called hidden features, we linearly combine them and form the output of the network. The so-called fundamental elements of knowledge are just the hidden neurons of the network. Okay, and the structural connections are small w in orange. They linearly combine the features. Frames of knowledge are not very important. They're the activation functions of the neural net, which in our case is just the identity function. Okay, so that's not very important. We are only concerned with 1 and 3. Let me clarify some assumptions that I'll be using throughout this whole discussion. The first one is that I assume the student and teacher are solving the same task. The teacher is classifying cats versus dogs. Well, same thing for the student. The second assumption is the student and teacher share the same architecture. And in this case, I assume they're both two-layer linear neural nets. It's basically as simple as it goes for analysis. The third one is I assume the teacher is fixed and the student is trained. The baseline learning algorithm for the student is MSE estimation or linear regression in machine learning terms. Essentially, I'm minimizing the predicted target, minimizing the difference between the predicted target and the true target. Student-teacher learning is a little more complicated. To learn the hidden neurons, I minimize the hidden feature difference between the student and teacher. To learn the structural connections, I minimize the difference between, well, the predicted target from the student and true target, except in this case, the hidden neurons of the student are fixed. Okay, now let's try to understand the first factor of knowledge representation, fundamental elements of knowledge. So I suppose one of the most basic questions I can ask is if I just give the hidden neurons of the teacher to the student, or basically these elements of knowledge from the teacher to the student, and I only train the structural connections of the student, do I, in this case, need fewer samples to train a student that has lower testing error, that has very low testing error? Of course, the comparison is made between student-teacher learning and the baseline learning, basically MSE estimation. And yes, I need to assume that the teacher is actually good, has low testing error. And the answer to my question is yes. we do have lower sample complexity if we make certain assumptions about the hidden neurons and the input distribution. The theorem itself is not very important. I mean, it's a very artificial setting anyways. But there are two interesting observations. The first one is that the number of samples now depend reasonably on the dimension of the hidden space. Okay, that's very easy to understand because we're just learning a linear map from the hidden space to the targets. So the dimension of the input space is irrelevant now. And the second insight is that the hidden features need to have some kind of concentration behavior. Essentially, their covariance matrix cannot be ill-conditioned. Otherwise, we could still need a lot of training samples for the student to reach a reasonable testing error. Okay, now let's look at the other factor, which is structural connection. Let's assume the opposite thing. If I assume that the structural connections are known, basically small ws is equal to small wt, and we are only training the hidden neurons by this optimization problem, which I mentioned before, and it's basically the minimization between the hidden features of the student and teacher. Then, would I also have a positive case for student-teacher learning, meaning that I would also be able to reach low testing error for the student with a small amount of training samples? Again, comparisons made between student-teacher and baseline. And the answer is yes. Okay. Again, the theorems themselves are very artificial, and there's too much about them that seems irrelevant to reality. But the messages, some messages they convey are interesting. The first one is that if the student, so basically, if the hidden neurons of the teachers are very complicated, then we might not be able to do good student-teacher learning. Basically, the student could still have a very hard time learning from the teacher. Okay, it's only when the teacher's hidden neurons are simple. For linear models, we could say simplicity means sparsity, and complicated hidden neuron means they're very dense. And basically, simplicity of the hidden neuron makes student-teacher learning easier, so the student doesn't require that many samples to generalize well. And that is very much it for my treatment of this problem. It's a very preliminary study, and there still remain a lot that can be done. Now, thank you for listening.